So this week we read Parshas Noach. And in Parshas Noach, we learn a halacha. The Pasuk says, Ach es dimchem lenafshoi seichem edroish. Rashi explains, and it's based on a Gemara in Bava Kamet Tzaddik Aleph Omid Beis. Rabbi Lozer Oimer, Miyad nafshoi seichem edrosh et dimchem. Ma'abed atzmai ledas. This is the prohibition of committing suicide. I wish this would be just an abstract sugya, fascinating, interesting. To my terrible dismay and sorrow, it's halacha l'maisa. So in the past few years, there were two very famous and high-profile cases of suicide in the Haredi community. Both caused extreme controversy. But our big problem is not famous people. There are many, many cases of suicide in the Frum community, in Israel and in America. And usually it is such embarrassment and ogmas nefesh for the families. Families will always blame themselves, sometimes rightfully so. And it's always hush-hush, trying to keep it quiet, mishum kvoid ha-mishpocha. But it's a terrible tragedy. And it's not like a person getting killed in an avalanche or cancer. We always feel futile. Could have been prevented in many cases. So before we go into the sugya, the most important thing is to listen and to see and to care. Nobody commits suicide out of the blue, getting up in the morning and decided he wants to die. It's always out of extreme desperation. We should open our ears and eyes and hearts to the desperation of others, to their stress, to their feelings, parents, siblings, educators, mechanchim, rosh hashivas. We should feel the problems, the tribulations, the feelings, the stress, the issues that our youngsters have, and deal with them before it comes to such a terrible stage. But today, as every week, we learn a sugya. So it's a prohibition, an aveira le'abed atzmai ledas. The Medrash says in this week's Parsha, Yochel Kishol, would that include Shaul HaMelech? Shaul HaMelech killed himself. As we learn in Shmuel Aleph Perek Lamed Beis, when he sees the Pelishtim coming closer with their bows and arrows and spears, he asks from his Noisei Kalim, kill me with your sword. And the young boy is terrified. He's not going to kill Melech Yisrael, the king of Israel. And Shaul pleads with the Noisei Kalim, Dokraini, I don't want to fall into the hands of the Pelishtim. V'dekruni v'hit alelubi. They will torment me. They will torture me. V'yipar al-chaba v'yamois. And Chazal and Medrash exclude Shaul from the prohibition, that they don't explain why is Shaul different. Why wasn't Shaul a ma'abed atzmai ledas? So my first ha'ora is, when a person takes his own life, is that considered loy sirtzach? Is that murder? Is it gimel averas chamuras shebetoira? Or maybe it's just a prohibition that we learn from this posik. Machloikes achronim, the base mayor, Yoredea, Reish Tezvov Sifei says, it's loy sirtzach. There's no difference whether you take your own life or another's life. The Chassam Sofer writes the same. Chuvas Yerdei Shin Chovov. We will quote the Chassam Sofer many times in today's Shiur because he is one of the most important shuvas in this sugya. And the Chassam Sofer writes, Toich Kedei Advorim. It is Retzich and Gimel Averas Chamur Shebetoire. The Minchas Chinuch has a different opinion. And a mitzvah lamedala, the Minchas Chinuch write, it's not lo sirtzach, it's not murder. It's a separate prohibition that we learn from this posuk. Would there be an nafka mina? Maybe there would be. Is a person entitled to take his life to save another? I don't mean putting his life in jeopardy and danger to save another. That's a totally different sugya. And in this week's sugya, in the contrast that comes together with this shiur, in this week's sugya, I have a disagreement with the great Shoel HaMeshiv. The Shoel HaMeshiv writes, when a person, out of total negligence, endangers his life and he dies, that is a ma'abed atzma l'das. And even though I brought a source to the Shoel HaMeshiv from Sefer Hasidim, I disagree. When a person puts his life in danger and jeopardy, he is over an hishom alachu v'shmar nafshechu ma'od v'nishmarta ma'od le'nafshesechem. And recently we spoke about these sugyas, but that is not ma'abed atzma l'das. Ma'abed atzma l'das is suicide. When a person takes his life, intentionally kills himself. What would be the nafka between the Minchas Chinuch on one hand, Chasam Sofer Beis Meir on the other? I'm asking you a crazy shaila. Not only al pi Torah, I think the same would apply in modern medical ethics. A young person desperately needs a heart transplant. He's doomed. The doctors say he won't live more than a very short while. His heart isn't functioning. He needs a transplant. They do not find a donor. His father comes into the hospital. I love my son. He's a great Talmid Chacham. I'm an ignoramus. He's young. I'm old. I want to donate my heart to save my son. Take me into the operating room. Take out my heart and plant it in my son's chest. Would we do that? I know it's a crazy question. Sometimes we ask questions like Chazal did just to clarify and to impose on us to formulate an opinion. So according to the Chasam Sofer and Beis Meir, of course, we can do that. So when the Gemara says in Masechet Sanhedrin, how do we know that Loi Tirtzach is Yehereg Val Yavar? Mach chozas the dama de dach sumaktvei, dilme dama de de sumaktvei. Why do you think your blood is redder than his? We would say the other way around. My chozas the dama de de sumaktvei, dilma dama de dach sumaktvei. Why do you think his blood is redder than yours? So according to the Beis Meir and the Chasam Sofer, taking a life is taking a life. It is irrelevant that it's your life. Your life isn't yours. Your life is yours to live. Your life is not yours to die. Our life is like a pekodin. We are keepers of a sacred neshama. Our life is ours to live. V'chai behem v'lo sheyomes behem. That's a new interpretation. V'chai behem v'lo sheyomes behem. So according to these two great Gedolim, there is no difference whatsoever whether they take your life or another's life. So why do we need to learn from the Posuk in this week's Parsha? Just, we shouldn't make a mistake. Because logically a person might argue, this is my life. If it's my life, it's mine to give or take. Kamash Malan, no, it's not your life. It's your life to live, but not to take. But according to the Minchas Chinuch, separate is. So it is not lo yisirtzach. So in my Ksubim I explained, the Minchas Chinuch maintains, lo yisirtzach is a benodam l'chaveroi. It's a benodam l'chaveroi. It's Gimel Avedas Chamura Shabbatorah, but fundamentally, in its very essence, it's a benodam l'chaveroi, and therefore taking your own life is not lo yisirtzach. It is a separate issur. Maybe according to the Minchas Chinuch, a person would be able to give his heart to save another person. So a chassid comes, the Baal Shem Tov Lo Aleinu needs a heart transplant. And a chassid says, it'll be the greatest privilege for me to give my heart to the Baal Shem Tov. Just think about it. Your heart will be in the Baal Shem Tov's chest. Your heart will be his heart. Wow. So this is an interesting shaila. Totally irrelevant, as I explained, but interesting. So that's a machlokes between Gedolei Achronim, and now we move on. Why is Shoel different than any other person committing suicide? 4 different interpretations. 2 from Tosfos, Baalei Tosfos, another Rishonim, and 2 from the Marshal. The Ritva, Avodah Zorah Yud Ches Amud Aleph. It's actually a Tosfos, but Tosfos doesn't talk about Shoel. What do we have in Avodah Zarah Yud Ches Amud Aleph? The moving story of Chanina ben Teradion, B'shas Gzeir under the Romans. Reb Chanina ben Teradion, like his friend Reb Akiva, Makal Kehilos Barabim. Reb Yosef ben Kisma is the Zokein Hador, and he's ill, and Reb Chanina comes to visit him. And Reb Yosef ben Kisma gives Musar to Reb Chanina ben Teradion. I atu yodaya she'umma zu min hashomayim himlichu she'chrivu es beisoi v'sorfa se'choloi. Hogu es chasido ve'ibdo es tuvov v'adaini keyemes. V'shomati olecho sha'ato makal kilis barabim v'sefer Torah monach lechu b'chakecho. How do you dare? Reb Chanina ben Teradion says, min hashomayim yarachabu. I have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Obviously, there were two different opinions between these two great Gedolim, the greatest of their generation. Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma said, we need to teach Torah in the underground, in the cellars, in the dark alleys, not where the Romans would see us. And Reb Chanina ben Teradion feels we need Mesiras Nefesh, Makal Kehilos Barabim. Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma is unhappy and he's angry with Reb Chanina's response. אני אומר לך דברים של טעם, ואתה אומר עליי מן השמיים ירחמו, טמא אני, הם לא ישרפו אותך ואת ספר התורה באש. Wow, that was a prophecy. He did not intend to curse חס ושלום. הדברים יוצאים מפי המלך. רבי יוסף בן קיסמא dies, כל גדול הרומי הולכו לקוברוי והספידו הספד גודל, and on the way back, they catch Reb Chanina ben Teradion. And my feeling is, the schus of Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma was Megan and Reb Chanina ben Teradion bar pluktei. The day Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma died on the way back from the Levaya, the story ended, and Reb Chanina ran in his court. Hikifu b'sefer Torah, and he's burned at stake. And the Talmidim stand there. It was a public spectacle. The brutality of the Romans. And the Talmidim plead with them, Psach espicho v'yakonis b'cho eish. We can't see you suffering. Please, put an end to it. Open your mouth and be consumed by fire. And Reb Chanina says, no. I will do nothing to hasten my demise. So Tosfos asks, is it a isser to hasten your demise even though they're torturing you? What about the story in Gittin Nun Zayinim and Beis? Daled Meis Tanoike Shenishbula Koloin, and they're taken by the Romans to Rome, to Europe, on a ship, and they realize what is their fate, what the Romans want to do with them. Torture them, abuse them. They jumped into the sea and perished. So what's the difference between those 400 bonim v'bonois, boys and girls, and Reb Chanina ben Teradion? Tosfos says, when a person is afraid that he will be forced to be over gimel averes chamura shebetoira, he is entitled to take his life and to commit suicide. That was not the case of Reb Chanina ben Teradion. Ritva brings Tosfos, and Ritva says, Shaul HaMelech committed suicide because he was afraid that the Pelishtim will force him and impose him to bow down to Avodah Zarah. Shach Taz bring the same interpretation from the Smak, Mitzvah Gimel, Shach and Taz, Kuf Nun Zayin Siv Koten Aleph. That is one Mahalach. But in Gittin Nun Zayin Amud Beis, by the story of the Gimel Daled Meis Tanoikos, Tosfos says, a person is entitled to take his life, he's being tortured, or he's afraid he will be tortured. Yisurim Koshem Amavis. And Tosfos quote the Gemara in Ksubas Yud Ches, if Hananya, Meshur, Vazariah, the three tzaddikim that were Ma'aseh Nefesh, if they would be tortured, they might bow down to Avodah Zarah. And therefore, Tosfos says, to escape torture, person could take his life. Parshas Shulchan Aruch Shin Mem Hey Sif Aleph, Mashma Kedivrei Tosfos Begitten. Shulchan Aruch says, even though Ma'avedat Maras ein mesablam olav ve'ein koirem acharav, he's not buried between his brethren and others, over the fence, behind the fence. But if a person is an oines kishoel melech, he deserves proper kavod. The Loshen Oynes Keshol HaMelech doesn't seem to indicate that if he's being forced to be over Avera. The Shach, Sif Kotenvov writes, Shol HaMelech committed suicide, he took his life because Kepashti the crow, like the Pasuk says, V'dikaruni v'yet allelubi. They will torture me. They will abuse me. So these are the two different opinions. And many Gedolim throughout the ages, Pascal, when a person is afraid of torture or he is being tortured, he's entitled to take his life. So why didn't Reb Chanina ben Teradian do so? According to Toises and the Ritvan Avodah Zorah, well, they weren't out to impose on him to be over Avera. But according to Toises and Gittin, why didn't he take his life? I didn't mention before, but the continuation of the sugi is Kalatz Tuniri was the young executioner, a goy, and he sees the pain and the suffering of the great Tana, the great Tzaddik Reb Chanina ben Teradian, and he asks Reb Chanina, Im ani moirid ma'alib chusvugim shel tzema v'ani marbe b'chavila. I'll take the fluid off your chest, and I'll stoke the fire to hasten your death. Do you promise me Olam Haba? And he said, yes, I promise you Olam Haba. If that is an Isser, he cannot do that al yedei acherim. The Rambam clearly says, Perik Beis Minchas Utzeach, if a person even sends a goy to kill, he bears a certain degree of responsibility. And therefore, my feeling would be, and that is miyashav, the opinions that a person is entitled to take his life to prevent torture, Reb Chanina ben Teradian is Midas Chasidus. That is also mashma from his Lashon. Mutav yetlena mishanasona va'al yachaber ba'atzmai. Better sheval tais l'era kodesh baruch hu, take your nisham. And that is why when Kalatz Tuniri wanted to do it, Rebbe Kiva gave him, Reb Chanina ben Teradian gave him the go-ahead, please, and he promised him Gan Eden. So these are the two fundamental opinions. According to the Rishonim, Toises and Gittin, that a person is entitled to take his life to prevent excessive suffering and pain and torture. Is that only when Goyim are torturing him? Or when a person is desperately ill, advanced cancer, and he's moidig in pain, does he have the right to take his life? Even if we would say yes, according to Toises, that still would not be a psak halacha l'maaseh. I think there's a difference. When he's being tortured by Goyim, yes. If he's ill, take medicine, palliative care, daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yisurim Amarkan Avenu Yosef Shalodam cannot take his life. I was involved, and I'm not mentioning any names because of Kvoid HaMishpocha, but I knew a young man that was a paraplegic. He was in a terrible car accident, and for decades was paralyzed from neck down, and he had terrible pain. And I went to visit him from time to time, and he decided he can bear this no longer. He wants to put an end to it. And he asked me for a heter, and I spoke to him many times, and I said, I will never give you a heter. He asked me, if I go ahead and do it, will you pray for my neshama? I said, I will. But don't take this in any way as giving legitimacy. At some stage, he lost his emunah. Who could judge? Who could judge? He decided to go to Switzerland. There's a company in Switzerland that does what is it called? Palliative sedation. Put you to sleep. And he traveled there. And I told his brother and sister, go along. Don't leave him just with the goyim. Maybe he'll regret. Maybe he'll do tshuva. You gotta be there. He should say vidui. He traveled. The last day of his life, he was like a tzaddik. Talis and tefillin all day. He said Shema Yisrael 1,000 times, saying Tehillim all day, but he went ahead. And my psak for the Chevra Kaddish is bury him a proper burial with the Avelis and his Peidim, and I'll explain why soon in a few minutes. So when a person is in terrible pain, according to some Rishonim, he's entitled to take his life. I do think there's a difference between being tortured by people and illness. The Yam Shel Shloima, Bava Kama Perek Ches Menuntes, offers two different explanations about Shaul HaMelech. Number one, if Shaul HaMelech would be taken into custody by the Pelishtim and they would torture him, it would be a terrible Chilul Hashem. Shaul Bechir Hashem, appointed by Shmuel HaNavi, that would be a Chilul Hashem. And to prevent Chilul Hashem, Shaul HaMelech took his life. The other approach of the Marshal is a big chiddush. It's the Marshal's creativity, and he says maybe Shaul knew his army. He knew how much the people loved him and admired him. And if he will be taken as a POW, as a prisoner by the Pelishtim, the Jewish warriors would fight a futile battle, a hopeless battle, just to try to save him, dead or alive. And tens of thousands of Jews might perish in that war, that battle. To save those tens of thousands, those alafim v'ravavos, Shaul preferred to take his life. So those are the two tirus and the two explanations of the Yam Shel Shloima. And there's an afkaman halacha between all these four perushim. There's a medrash in Eicho Rabosi Perek Aleph. Tzidkiyahu HaMelech was tortured by the Babylonians. His eyes were gouged out. His kids were tortured and killed before his eyes, before making him blind. And the Medrash says, where was his seichel? He should have bashed his head into the wall and taken his life. So what Shaul did, the Medrash says Tzidkiyahu should have done. But he didn't. So according to the first approach, Toises and Avodah Zorah, the heter of Shaul, he was afraid they will force him to bow down to the Tzelem. That doesn't apply to Tzidkiyahu. The fact is they didn't. They didn't. They just wanted to torture him, like the Nazis. By the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, didn't matter whether you're... It was a matter of race. Jews that converted to Christianity got the same treatment as all the others. Your grandfather was a Jew, al pi halacha. Your grandfather was a Jew, al pi halacha. You're not a Jew at all. To the Nazis, it made no difference. They just wanted to kill us all. So according to the first Malach, the heter of Shaul wouldn't apply to Tzidkiyahu. According to the second, it will, and how he was tortured. Yisurim. According to the first Malach HaMashal, yes, Tzidkiyahu is a king. He was also Nisman al Pi Navi, same Chilul Hashem. According to the second Malach of the Mashal, it wouldn't apply. There were no armies, there was no war, nobody died to try to save Tzidkiyahu. So there's an afkam halacha between one Mahalach and the other. And now, I want to discuss how the poskim relate to these questions. Halacha l'maisa. But before we get to that, even if a person is entitled to take his life to salvage himself from Yisurim, could another person do so to help him to salvage him? That once again depends on the different mahalcha. If it's a din and kiddush Hashem, then the answer is yes. There are three sources to a terrible, terrible discussion. Daze keinem mabani toisus. Ritva avodah zorah yud ches amud aleph. Beis Yosef bedek abayis yoredei kuf nun zayin. Do you know that the Torah's wife, his mother-in-law, and her husband took their lives? It was the time of the Crusades, and some Gedolim paskined, if we are afraid that we'll fall into the Christian hands and they will try to force us to accept Oisei Wish and Christianity, person is entitled to take his life. So that is based on the first Mahalach, Toises and Avodah Zorah. But the argument was, what do we do with children? The children will be snatched away from their homes, taken into captivity, raised as Christians, Avodah Zorah. Some Gedolim of Bali Toisa says we should kill the children actively. Others said no. You could kill yourself, but you can't kill children. And the Beis Yosef brings a terrible climax to this machlokes. One of the Gedolim said we should take the lives of the children. The other said no. We should pray that the Gzeira should be bottled. And the person that said you cannot do this told the Godel that said we should do it, you're going to die a Misa Mishuna if you go ahead with your plans. He went ahead with his plans, and they killed children. And the Posek that said we should do it had a terrible, terrible death, as described in the Bes Yosef Kuf Nun Zayin Bedek HaBayis. And in a short while, the Gzeira was bottled, and it became clear that killing those children had no justification. And if they would be alive, they will be in their homes, in our community. Tragic question discussed in the Sforim of 3 Gedolim of our time. In the days of the Holocaust, and so many horrific questions became relevant then. Only the Jewish people had to deal with these horrific questions in Shailas and Halacha. The Nazis in one of the ghettos asked all the Jews to hand over all their precious items, especially furs. And they gave them 2 days' time. If any fur would be found in anyone's possession after those 2 days, he would be killed immediately. And they took 3 elders of the community. You bear responsibility. And if we find any fur, you will be tortured and killed. So one of the Chachamim of the ghetto did not hand over a fur hat. And he was caught. He was shot in the head immediately. And they took the 3 elders and they tortured them. They tortured them, and all the other members of the community need to look on. One died. The other was just beginning to be tortured. Brutally hit with sticks and whips. His son couldn't bear the sight. He approached one of the Germans, offered him a gold watch, if you just shoot my father in the head. Actually, the Nazi offered him, do you want me to kill your father and save him from torture? Give me something. He offered a gold watch, and he killed him. And after the liberation, after many years, this person was riddled with guilt. And he asked, am I a Retzeach? Did I kill my father? Did I do a mitzvah or a terrible aveda? And we find 3 tshuvas. Minchas Yitzchak. Chelek Vav Simenun Vav. Lahoides Nosen, Reb Nosen Gestetner. I had a very special relationship with Reb Nosen, one of the Gedolim of our time. Chelek Beis Mesamechei. And the Mishnah Halachas, the Menashe Klein. I think it's in Chelek Yud somewhere, but I might be mistaken. These 3 Gedolim, everybody responds in his different style. In Minchas Yitzchak is a very short tshuva, 10 lines, and he says, Shekoires v'lo miyayin. We cannot judge anyone in those tragic circumstances. Your mind was just blocked out. Shekoires v'lo miyayin. Nobody bears responsibility. How could a person see his father being tortured and be of clear state of mind? It totally absolves him of any guilt. Reb Nosen Gestetner has 3 Samonim, Samachei, Samach Vav, Samach Zayin. He usually writes very long tshuvas and magnificent tshuvas. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And he deals with every aspect of the Shaila. And he says, L'choire, he bears responsibility. However, his kavanah was L'shem Shemayim. It was out of Rachmones. So we shouldn't make it hard for him. He should give tzedakah and say tefillin. Reb Menashe Klein is somewhat similar to Reb Nosen Gestetner. I knew him very well. We also had a very special, our family, my father, my late father, and him were very close friends. He was a Kloisenberger Chassid, a Kloisenberger Talmid. So this same question comes back. It depends on the reasoning. If we go back to Shol HaMelech, if the heter was Chilul Hashem, applies to others as well. If the heter was Pikuach Nefesh of Ravovis, applies to others as well. But if the heter is just, you're an oines because you can't bear Yisurim, that would give you a permit, but not others. So this is a very interesting and broad discussion. Let's move on. So the Shailas Halacha L'Maisa regarding Ma'abadat Adas are only dealt with in one area of Choshen Mishpat, and that is Hilchos Avelis, because no one would ever give a heter lechatchila. But the question is always b'di'evet. It happens. It tragically does. I wish it wouldn't. And I think in many cases we could prevent with more sensitivity, with more caring. Trying to deal with depression, with mental health, emotional stress, psychological trauma. But it happened. It always did, and probably always will. We will try to save as many as we can. But it happens. And according to the Gemara Masechet Smochos, the Braisa, and Shulchan Aruch Shimon Hey Sif Aleph, Ein misabla molav, no avelis, no kriya, no proper burial. But the Achronim are extremely makel. So let me give you examples. There was a story 200 years ago. A Jewish person was in jail. I don't know which country. He killed another person, charged with murder, and he was in jail. He took his life. He was found hanged in his cell. The Baruch Frankel, the Baruch Tam, the Rav of Leipzig, paskind, the family should sit shiva, because who could judge in a goyish cell 200 years ago? I always tell people, if you gotta sit in jail, Medina Yisrael is the place, better than anywhere else. Far better than Rikers Island in Malchus Shel Chesed in New York. I know some people that became Talmidei Chachomim in Israeli jail. They have shiurim, you have as many Sifra Kodesh as you wished, most kosher food. Really, I know some people. One person finished Shas in jail, and he wasn't much of a learner before he went into jail. So what was the story? Baruch Frankel says, who could judge his turmoil, his stress, his pachad for torture? Maybe he was tortured. So one of the Gedolim disagreed with the Baruch Frankel, and the question was sent to the Mordechai Benet, and we find two tshuvas, Parshas Mordechai Yerodei Chofei Chavav, and he is lenient. The same question obviously was presented to one of the greatest Sephardi Gedolim of the era, the Chido. Chaim Shol, Chelek Aleph Semem Vav, he is lenient as well. The Chassam Sofer deals with similar questions, Yerodei Shin Chavav. And they all make the same point. When a person takes his life out of terrible desperation, Nishtabsha olav da'atoi, he no longer bears responsibility, and we cannot judge him. Some Sofer is medaik from Masechet Smochos. If you find a person dead and you don't know exactly how it happened, Chazaka she'ibed atzmoi shelo ledat. That's a new concept. Ma'abed atzmoi ledas, ma'abed atzmoi shelo ledat. So the Chassam Sofer explains, when a person just goes over the brink and something snaps in his mind, no longer has a din of ma'abed atzmoi ledas. The Chassam Sofer stresses the importance of kavod mishpucha, and that is interesting. That's a big chiddush. So the Chassam Sofer writes, Sofek avelis lekula, but Sofek kavod mishpucha lechumra, and that overrides Sofek avelis lekula. My only problem with this ruling is nobody commits suicide out of a clear and healthy state of mind. Why would a person take his life if he's okay? Everybody that takes his life, and anybody that takes his life, probably is in extreme stress and desperation. So what's the tipping point? Where exactly, and how do we draw the line? How would we know? Beyond which point of despair person no longer bears responsibility. Nobody ever committed suicide if he was happy and well. But we do see the trend, Gedolei Yisrael, probably Mishum Kvoid Mishpocha, are extremely lenient in b'diavad cases. And as much as we need to clarify that taking your life is murder, it's like taking another's life. It has no justification in any circumstance. B'diavad, Gedolei Marmekel. The Beis Ephraim, Chuvas Yerodei Ayan Vav, Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Megori says, even financial stress we cannot judge. Sometimes even financial stress. Ma'aviras odam al da'atoi, and could cause such a deep depression that we would no longer judge them as a ma'abed atzma l'das. Reb Shlomo Ege Gilya Marshu Yoredei Shir Mem Hey quotes a ksav yad from Chacham Tzvi. Person jumped into the sea or into the ocean, into a river to commit suicide. He says because it takes some time when you fall into water till you actually perish. Person tries to fight the waves, he tries to swim, he takes a deep breath. It'll take a few seconds or a minute or two before he dies. We assume he probably did tshuva and he could no longer save himself, and therefore, kol kavod hara'ui. So we all saw the pictures when the World Trade Centers collapsed. People jumping out of windows in the 90th floor and the 100th floor. Sensible person jumps out of a window on the 90th floor, the 80th floor, he knows that he's not going to have a soft landing. I don't know whether any of those people were Jewish. I don't think so. But many jumped out of the windows. Why did they do so? Because dying by suffocation and by heat is such a torturous death. Just impulsively, instinctively, they just jumped out of the windows. They couldn't bear the pain. They knew that they're dying. Al pi halacha, would that be justified? Would they have a din of ma'abatzim l'das? Where were they buried? Or were they din of Eilis? And I say, of course, yes. For both reasons. Pachad miyasurim, not a clear state of mind, terrible desperation. If you would be interested, it'll take about a minute and a half if you jump out of the 90th floor till you land. So we assume probably did tshuva. Zera Emes, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, Chelek Gimel Kuf Nun Zayin disagrees. He deals with the question, a person drank a potion of death. Not cyanide. Cyanide usually kills you immediately, but he drank samamavis. And after he drank it, he regretted, and he started crying. And he said, I want to do tshuva. And nevertheless, he paskened ein misa'abel olav. So this is a matter of disagreement. So we dealt with various different shaylas, various different questions. In my sefer, I also dealt with a question many achronim discuss. A person took his life, and he thought he's going to have kapora. He was over on Avenes Chamuris. There's no Dalad Mises Basin. So he killed himself, thinking that would be his kapora. It isn't his kapora. But nevertheless, because he had such a tragic mistake, and he was Mechaven Hashem Shemayim, we would sit Avelis. Medrash Shabbat Parshas told us there's a story of Yokum Ish Tzareiros. Obviously, he was an engineer. And he built a contraption, some kind of machine, in which he pulled a lever, and he had Daled Mises Bezdin in the same instance. He had a noose around his neck. He fell. Rocks and stones fell on top of him. He fell into fire. Daled Mises Bezdin. His uncle Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida said, Kadmani zele Gan Eden. Does that prove he had a heter? Some say yes. I say definitely not. But a Kodesh Baruch Hu is a boichin kaloyes v'leiv. In his situation, out of his desperation, with his crazy idea, mezuman l'chayei olam haba. So let's just summarize everything we said. Taking one's life is like murder. It's like retzicha. Mestava kedivrach sam soifer v'beis meir, lo kedivrach minchas chinuch. And everybody should understand, in no circumstances could you take your life. In the most dire straits, put your faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Remember, Chayoy Lamabo is the real thing. But b'di'evid, if this tragedy happens, and we should do everything to avoid this from happening, to prevent it. As I said at the beginning of this year, if it happens, we are always makel b'di'evid, mishum koydem mishpocha, to give the person a proper burial, dinei avelis and kriya. So one of the high-profile cases, the person that took his life, and I'm not here to judge, had a huge levaya with the spadim, and that was a mistake. That was a terrible mistake. We cannot glorify suicide, chas v'sholem. But the most fundamental degree of kvoid hameis and kvoid hamishpocha, almost always, where the Gedolim's ruling was, yes, kvura, avelis, kriya, and kvoid hameis. So this week is Parshas Noach. And I want to share a thought which I shared many times in the past, I think almost every year, because it has great appeal to me. The story of the Mabel starts in Parshas Bereshis. Its climax is in Parshas Noach. V'yar Hashem ki ra b'ro'as ha'odam, v'kol yetzer machshavas libo rak al hayoyim. V'yanochem Hashem she'osas odam v'yoyma, emches odam al pnei odamo, v'noach motze chaim be'enei Hashem. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to destroy the world, destroy humankind, destroy the animals. It is only Noach and his family, and a pair of every species, that will prevail and survive. And then when Noach comes out of the teva, and he brings a korban, v'yorach Hashem es reich anachoyach v'yoymer, loy oisef oy lekarlos odom ba'avur odom, ki yetze leva odom ra min ha'urav, v'chi ketega nasas nega. The same reason that brought HaKadosh Baruch Hu to destroy the world, could that be the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides never again? How do we understand that? So the Pasuk in Noach and the Pasuk in Bereshis seem to be the same, but there are three very fundamental differences in the formula, in the nusach. And all three differences are in words of emphasis. Kol, ra, rak, kol hayom. Parshas Bereshis, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to destroy the world, the Pasuk says, Kol yetzer, machshavas liboy, rak ra, kol hayom. What's written in Parshas Noach? Lo oisef oy lekarlos adom ba'avur odom, ki yetzer leva odom. Pasuk doesn't say kol yetzer, ki yetzer leva odom ra, not rak ra. Ki yetzer leva odom ra min urav, not kol hayoim. So what's the difference? What happened between Bereshis and Noach? What happened? Something extremely significant. When Noach knows to differentiate between Chaya Tahora and Chaya Sheinena Tahora, between the pure and the impure animals, Rashi writes, Noach Lomed Torah. Noach was the first human being to learn Torah. Tanchum Parshas B'Chakoyse says, Odom Rishon didn't learn Torah. Noach not only learned Torah, Noach taught Torah. His son Shem, his Einikel, his grandson Eva, they were Rosh Yeshiva. Noach was a teacher of Torah. Seder HaDorah says that Avram Avini learned Torah by Noach 8 years. He has the cheshbon of 8 years. Man without Torah, futile, no chance. Ein tikva la'achrisai ve'ein sachar lepu'ulasai. Ein tikva ve'ein tochelet. He stands no chance. The world must be destroyed. The new world. And when I say the new world, I don't mean the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. The new world. Noach's world. The world of Torah. Still a huge challenge. Still man has so much to work on. אבל יש תקווה לאחריסוי. There is hope. There is possibility. יצר לב האדם רע מנעוריו, but it could be fixed, and it could be purified, and the Yetzer could be overcome with Torah. That is the difference. So we start a new year, a new cycle. Once again, Bereshis Noach. And this week, hundreds of thousands of Talmidei Chachamim went back. Lebotei Midrashos, lebotei Knesios, to yeshivas, to koilelim. It's a great time. So Yom Tov are magnificent, lovely, uplifting. What a month, Chodesh Tishrei. But we also thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for coming back to our blessed routine, our wonderful routine of learning Torah. Yehi Ratzon, we should all be zeicher this coming year with good health, barius guf and na'ora ma'aliyah, to learn and to teach, lahagidel Torah u lahadira.